building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dion Lim, and welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. What we're doing is we're asking experts your questions every day at 3 o'clock to get answers for you in real time. Coming up, we'll talk with the mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs. He has an incredible story of becoming mayor at the age of 26 and is now the subject of a documentary. We have much more on that coming up in just a moment. But first, we're focusing on housing this week, all as part of our effort to build a better Bay Area. And part of that involves rent. As we know, the Bay Area has among the highest rents in the world, and the middle of the pandemic doesn't seem to help. It is getting overwhelming. So joining us to talk about how to negotiate your rent, among other financial issues, is Ramit Sethi. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. That sounds pretty good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's talk about the idea of negotiating rent, because for me, growing up in a very traditional Asian American household, my mom always said you can negotiate anything. She'd be negotiating at the farmer's market, she'd be doing it at CVS, but rent isn't something usually people think about. What have you heard from renters right now?
Well, your mom had a lot of wisdom, because rent is one of those things that we don't commonly think of as being negotiable. But if you look at our expenses, particularly if you live in the Bay Area or in another big city, it typically is the biggest single expense. It turns out that there are times where you can negotiate your rent. It's just basic supply and demand. And right now is one of the best times in over a decade to cut your rent and save a ton of money.
Okay, so you gave me some pretty shocking statistics before this newscast. You said rents are way down. I've heard some conflicting reports, but what have you experienced? What have you seen, not only in New York, where you are based right now, but during the times, I mean, you lived a number of years in the Bay Area, right in San Francisco.
Right. I did indeed. And so I know what it's like to have those rents that just only seem to go up every single year. But over the last decade, my rent in New York, in Manhattan, has gone up, but it's also gone down at times. When the market got soft, I called my landlord up and I said, look, I'm not going to pay more. Look at the comps of what's going on. I came in prepared using what I call the briefcase technique. I pulled out my papers, my research. I had followed the market, and oftentimes I was able to negotiate that rent down. Turns out right now, as I said, is one of the best times, because my landlord called me effectively saying, name your price.
What?
We want you to stay. Yes, and that's happening in New York, it's happening in San Francisco, and it's happening in the wider Bay Area.
Okay, this is really eye-opening to me, because I've never heard that you can name your price for rent. I mean, what is the incentive for a landlord? Because aren't you already locked into a lease, and aren't there usually penalties? I think that's what people are usually afraid of.
Correct. If you are within a lease, then you can't just break that lease without some sort of penalty. But if your lease is coming up, you want to do your research, because you have to know there are certain times where it's a seller's market, other times where it's a buyer's market or a renter's market. Because so many people are leaving or have left the city, that means that there is less demand, and it's just simple economics. Prices go down. Now, landlords typically do not want to reduce their sticker price. Okay, they don't want to do that for a variety of reasons. So what they will do is they will do a lot of clever concessions. They'll give you a month free. They'll give you 2 months free. Sometimes some are even giving 3 months free. Even beyond that, eventually they will have to lower the sticker prices as economic pressure becomes more and more. And that's exactly what we see happen.
You sound a lot like my agent, because with the television contract, it's not only just about the money, but all of the other perks, hair, makeup, travel, things that maybe people don't usually think about.
That's exactly right. See, as renters, we typically only think that we have to accept what's given to us, but that is not true. And that's one of the goals of why I wrote I Will Teach You to Be Rich, is for all of us to take our finances into our own hands. We can fight back against the credit card companies. We can fight back against seemingly always upwards trajectory of rent increases. And right now you can go to them, and you have to remember, landlords do not want vacancies. 1 month of vacancy can eliminate an entire year's worth of profits. So what you want to do is you want to plan early. You want to write them or call them and say, look, because of COVID, if this is accurate, you want to say, because of COVID, it's making me difficult to continue. I'd like to discuss what options you have available for me. Or you can simply say, look, I'd like to discuss my rent. Based on the comps in this neighborhood, rents are down 15%. Therefore, I'd like to renegotiate at this price. Now, the landlord obviously would love if you paid the same or paid more, but ultimately it's an economic business choice. They may say, no way, you're out. But you should remember, you have mobility to be able to choose many other options as a renter. So do not give up and don't despair. You have a lot of power, especially right now.
I like how you always mention it's part psychology as well. And when you mention the briefcase technique, you're actually giving people step-by-step instructions on how to execute asking. It's something that I talk about in my book, Make Your Moment, because the way you ask can make or break the response. What are some of those techniques that people can deploy when they're asking?
Most of us grow up not really negotiating. In fact, we think negotiation is purely adversarial and that people have to get mad at each other. But as you and I know, growing up, that's not true. It's part of the game. And so when you walk in, what I describe with the briefcase technique, which you can search online for, is you come prepared. You do your homework. You know what the rents are in your area, in your square footage, in your neighborhood. And you say, look, here's what I'd like to discuss. Here are the comps. Here's what I propose. Let's have a discussion. Nothing angry about it. In fact, you can even be quite amicable. You can say, you know, if it's helpful, instead of a 30-day notice of vacancy, I'd be willing to set up a 60-day notice because I know that you don't want to have any vacancies, right? You can work with your landlord, but key to remember is it's pure economics. This isn't about emotions. It's not about somebody feeling bad. These are the numbers. This is the math. And if you can't offer me what I believe that this is worth, I will find plenty of other places that will.
Ramit, we are taking viewer questions, and one that has just come in is, what about options for, let's say, a high demand area? Because we've always heard that, sure, maybe in certain neighborhoods, prices can be negotiated more. What about those places where the demand is super high and you feel like you don't even have a choice going in? You have very little leverage.
Usually you can't negotiate. I wish I had a better answer for you, but as I said, it's basic economics. So if you have constrained supply, which is a huge problem in the Bay Area that needs to be solved, then you are going to have just a tiny bit of supply, and therefore prices are going to go up. However, you should remember that right now there are a lot of dynamics happening that might not be obvious. For example, this is anecdotal, but I've heard it in New York and San Francisco. One bedrooms or smaller areas tend to be very competitive. 3 bedrooms or larger apartments, which typically have families, there's a lot more supply because oftentimes those families may have left the city. So there's all kinds of flexibility. But ultimately, if there's just a ton of demand, you're not going to be able to negotiate most likely.
You touched upon anecdotal. What have you heard? I saw that you posed the question asking people on your own Twitter feed, have you tried to negotiate within the past 5 months? What have you been hearing?
Well, I'm going to share my example first. As I mentioned, my landlord called up, and at first they said, okay, we'd like you to sign. I said, what's your offer? And they said, oh, no rate increase. And I smiled. I said, nice try, but what's your real offer? Because you and I both know that the market is down. And again, this is that kind of dance. When the market goes up, I know that they're going to raise rent. That's fine. That's what they're entitled to. But when the market goes down, you better believe I'm going to negotiate. So they then came back and said 1 month free. Now, 1 month free is pretty substantial, but I laughed because I said, I can get that on the website right now. What else are you going to offer? Oh. So I started talking to other friends. There are friends who have gotten 2 months, 3 months. One friend got 6 months free. I would say that's unusual. That's an outlier. But what I have discovered, at least in Manhattan, is we are talking about 25 to 40% decreases in rent, depending on where you are. This is quite stunning. It's things that's not talked about publicly. In San Francisco, we have quite a few reports showing that those numbers have come down steadily since March and April. I asked my readers, I want to share 2 numbers that they shared. One of them negotiated $4,000 off of his offer.
Wow.
Another person negotiated from $2,147 to $1,774. These are big, big savings.
Astronomical savings. We'll talk a little bit more. We do have to head to break on air. Stay with us, Ramit. We'll be taking some more questions from viewers live. We'll be streaming live on Facebook through the commercial. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Okay, I think that was very interesting. Thank you all for joining us. If you are tuning in on Facebook, we are still live on the air on ABC7. I know so many people have asked this question of how do you even approach rent reductions. It seems so intimidating. We have been talking with Ramit Sethi right now. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. We're going to be talking a little bit more about investing and where you should be putting your money right after the break. So please find me on Facebook. I am Dion Lim TV. Ramit, if people have some questions for you, what is your social media? Where can people get some answers?
You can find me on Instagram or Twitter at Ramit. That's R-A-M-I-T. And you can find my website and newsletter at iwt.com.
Okay, and you also have some other resources. We were talking about this earlier before the show, where people can turn to get some guidance on their financial situation, which right now a lot of people are feeling a little bit iffy about.
Yes, so I have two resources I want to suggest. One is if you're just not sure what to do with your money at all, how to save, how much to invest, what is investing, then I would recommend you pick up a copy of my book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. You can find it at any bookstore or public library, wherever you like. The second thing is, one of the things not commonly talked about is earning more. So that's something that I specialize in, is showing people how to start a side business, negotiate their salary, and other ways to earn more. You can learn more about that at iwt.com/earn.
That's interesting because maybe we'll talk about it. We are just about 30 minutes coming back on air, but about making that side hustle work for you during this economic climate and taking back control.
Yes, I would love to discuss that. It's something that more of us need to hear about and take action on.
Great. Okay. Stay with us. I think we are just back in a few minutes. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in on Facebook as well. I am reading your comments. It's a lot to multitask, but we'll see what we can do in getting you some answers with our financial expert, Ramit Sethi. Here we go. Once again, thank you for staying with us. We are back as well with Ramit Sethi. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. All right, a few minutes ago, we talked about negotiating your rent down in this economic climate. You're also a big proponent of taking the reins of your financial situation and making more money, not just saving. Let's elaborate a little bit more on that.
Everybody talks about cutting back and saying no. No, you can't buy lattes. No, you can't go travel. No, you can't do anything. I never wanted to live that kind of life. I wanted to use my money to say yes. And while I do believe that there is room for most people to cut on certain expenses, I believe there's a limit to how much you can cut, but no limit to how much you can earn. And when we think about earning, most of us think about our full-time job, which is the primary way that most of us make money. But there's also so many other options. And one of my favorites, especially at a time like this, is starting a side business or a side income. Before a lot of, it's funny, we had two major reasons that people would not do this. The first was, I don't have enough money to start. And the second one was, I don't have time. I have to tell you something funny. The no time reason has vanished. We have not heard that objection since March. So we do have time. Now, you may have more or less depending on children or family situations, but with a lack of a commute and other opportunities that happen to be really big right now, lots of people are starting side businesses and it can be transformative.
So you're saying that if you are a mom of four, let's say you're working a full-time job, you still can make time? Because I know there will be people who will be skeptical of this.
Well, look, my job is not to guilt or shame anyone into thinking that they're not doing enough right now. I think all of us have a lot of things on our mind, and whether it be 4 children at home, whether it be an ill parent, if that is your priority, you should do that, and you should never feel guilty about it. But there are people who are looking for other ways to create opportunities right now. And again, I wish that somebody with 4 children had help and childcare. I wish that that were the case. For that person, it's probably unrealistic. I want to be really candid. But if you do have time, and if you are ready to start something, there are so many ideas, creative ideas that are working right now. In fact, I'd love to share a couple of examples.
Please do.
Do you remember those classes that you would go to on a Friday night, the wine and painting classes that people would do? Remember those?
Those were very popular for a long time.
Yeah. One of my students in our Earnable program, she started a virtual painting class. Seems so simple. A virtual painting class, I think she charges about $100 per person. Imagine you can do that from your home and you can have people around the world join. I'll give you an example of something I paid for. My wife and I took a sangria making class. We had a blast. We got the ingredients. We made sangria. We had some drinks. And the people who are running that are making huge amounts of money. And as a customer, I loved it. So if you are great with children, you better believe there are parents who would pay for their children to be learning or to be entertained. If you're great at home organizing, if you are a personal stylist or you're just great at style, there are so many ways that you can use some of the techniques that we talk about. There's a worldwide audience out there. And even if people are paying you 20 or 50 bucks to start, you've suddenly created more income for yourself.
That's really interesting perspective, and I like that you are thinking outside the box and encouraging your followers to do the same. We only have about a minute or so left, but I do want to ask you this. Not too long ago, we spoke to Susie Orman. She takes the road of, being very conservative about things. We mentioned in the commercial break, what do you do if you are still looking for maybe a luxury product? For me, I would love a handbag, but now is not the economic time to do so, right?
Well, I like Susie a lot. I think she has some great advice. My philosophy is spend extravagantly on the things you love, but cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't. And what that means is you identify the things that are important. If a handbag is one of the top 5 things that are important to you, do it. Let's make sure you can afford it. Let's also make sure you're cutting back on other things that you don't necessarily love. But if you love it, I want you to spend, and I actually want you to spend more. That is what I teach on my website and in my book.
Okay, and before we head to break, once again, for anybody who may not have heard because we were on Facebook streaming, what is that resource that you want to share with everyone who may have more questions?
IWT.com. You can sign up right there. You can get a bunch of our material for free. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Ramit, R-A-M-I-T.
Okay, and a reminder to everybody out there, we are still taking your questions. We are live on Facebook, so please make sure to weigh in and let us know where you're tuning in from. We are back with Ramit Sethi, author of the New York Times bestseller, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Stay with us. We will be right back after a short break. Okay. Eric, I think we have our next guest. Is that right? Okay. Got it. Okay, great. Ramit, can you bear with me? Do you want to stay for just a couple minutes while I look through some of these comments?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, super. We are getting a lot of... Oh, okay. Unless you want to. This is totally optional. Do you have a minute?
Yeah, I'm happy to stay. I think this is great.
Are you sure? Okay, he says that he's happy to stay. Eric, does that work with you? Eric, by the way, is our lovely producer that I'm speaking to. Okay, so the comment, let's see, from people. You know what, I'm having difficulty getting to some of these comments. You'll have to forgive me. Technology.
No problem.
Okay. Eric, for some reason, I cannot load these.
You know, it's funny. I'm seeing the same thing on my end. That's
right?
So weird. Yeah, it says 88 comments. But...
Oh, okay, don't worry about it. Huh, that's interesting. Well, if you do have any comments, we have a few. Oh, you know what? Here's a good one. I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse or not, but let's go for it. At age 50, is it too late to try for owning a home? This question coming from Denise. I love this. What do you think?
Good question. Denise, no, it's not too late. Of course, it would be easier if you started at the age of 21, but hey, we work with what we've got. The first question I would ask is, I want to know why you want to own a home. You have to remember that in America, we've been told that owning a home is usually the best investment. And that's not always true. So I want to encourage you to first pick up chapter 9 of my book, where I show you some surprising...
I'm sorry,
behind
we have to
earning
wrap. If you could continue on Facebook with your response, that would be great to weigh in there. We have our next guest coming up. All right, we'll get to this in a moment, but we should mention that our next guest planned received a shout out during Governor Gavin Newsom's press briefing today. He was elected as mayor at the age of 26, and he now is at the center of a new HBO documentary film. It's called Stockton on My Mind. It debuts tomorrow on HBO and will be available to stream on HBO Max. We'll speak with Mayor Michael Tubbs very shortly. He happens to be the first African-American mayor of Stockton, and we'll get to some of... Got it. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first we have a story from ABC 7 News anchor Reggie Aki, and a story about how to raise anti-racist kids. Let's take a listen.
Tammy, I'm so pleased to talk to you because you've been doing some writings about how to raise a child who is anti-racist. And I'm very interested to hear this perspective, especially from someone like you who has an international perspective. To give people a little bit of a background, you've been all over the world.
Yes, that's right. So I grew up in England, as you can tell from my accent, and I'm from Nigeria, traveled pretty extensively through my life. So I've definitely had the privilege of seeing lots of different environments and lots of different cultures and countries.
And now you live in San Francisco. Something that really struck me, if you don't mind sharing, is to talk about an incident that happened at a gym. And this was an incident with a child and a mother. These are people I assume that you don't know. What happened there?
So I go to the gym on a regular basis, 3-4 times a week pre-COVID. And there was a day I went into the changing room. There was about 4 or 5 other women in there. One woman was there with her daughter, who was about 5. And as I walk in, the little girl points at me. She says, "Oh, Mummy, is she staff? As in, do I work there?" And I just stopped doing what I was doing and just looked to the mum to see what the mum was going to say. And the mum said, "Oh, is that because she's wearing a badge?" I wasn't wearing a badge. So I said to the little girl, I was like, as we can both really clearly see, I'm not wearing a badge. So if there was anything that caused any confusion, maybe it's my membership card that's on the table right next to me. And if you have a good look, it's exactly the same as your mom's. And one of the things for me about a situation like this, and I think part of the reason why it's resonated with so many people, is people like to think that children are colorblind, which is completely false. For the most part, children just don't attach judgment to race. And when they do say things like that, you have to catch it and correct it. You can't not say anything, because that's a microaggression that left unchecked can just keep happening, keep happening, keep happening. And these beliefs are really damaging. And there's so many different things the mum could have said apart from a lie.
Yes, and so I think that's a really interesting point, especially as someone who is watching something unfold or something that is directed to you. The other question is what to do about your own children at home, how to raise an anti-racist child so that hopefully they won't be asking strangers that sort of question when they're at the gym. And one of the things you are suggesting is reading.
Yeah, I love reading. I've always loved reading. I started reading books with my son when he was really young. And I think a really great way to introduce the notion of race to children is to just start having books with Black protagonists in them. So that way they can start to see other Black children doing exactly the same things that your child does at home. And it's just a really important, significant way to normalize Black. And I think there's so many different great books out there that people can get. And definitely the social justice books are really important. And that's a very different type of conversation. That's much more the big conversation about race, but just is like an easy entry point to talk about different races, different cultures, just having books reflective of that in your book collection at home with your children. And then, you know, just ask them questions and let the children ask you questions as well.
Is there a particular book that you would like to recommend to our audience?
I have several books that I love, but I think some of my favorites include Jabari Jumps, which is about a little Black boy that goes swimming with his dad. Super sweet book. I also really liked This Is How We Do It. And that's a book that follows 7 different children from 7 different countries just going through their day. This is what we have for breakfast in Rome, in Iran, in different cities. So I think that's also really good to get a strong sense of cultures.
I think that there is this feeling out there that from a lot of people, good-hearted people who wish to raise anti-racist children, but they feel a bit stuck. They're not exactly sure how to educate themselves before they then turn around and educate their children. And one thing that we have been talking a lot about is to not only rely on your Black friends or Black colleagues to inform you of what you should be doing. And I'd like to hear a little bit about that from you.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really important for parents to educate themselves, but it's an ongoing process. So it's not as if you're ever going to reach a point of being fully educated on anti-racist behavior. So it's a learning process that you just bring your children along with you. And I think one of the things that's actually really important that I've seen a lot as well is when you have to simplify something to explain it to a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, any child, you're looking at it in such simple ways that it also helps you understand it in a really simple way, because anti-racist behavior isn't necessarily particularly complicated. And I think one of the things that I've seen a lot as well is people have held this belief that, oh, if they have good intentions, that's enough. But I always feel the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because to mean well isn't enough. You have to do well. And I think just encouraging that type of behavior in children, you start to see how simple and straightforward it is to actually just constantly engage in positive behavior that benefits the Black community. And one of the things I've also said to friends is you want to raise your children to be upstanding allies, not bystanding allies. And what I mean by that is, and in a situation where something happens, you want your kid to be the white kid that stands up and says something for the Black kids. So in really simple terms, if you see something, you say something.
I love that. An upstanding ally. I'm going to take that away from this conversation. Such a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, Temi.
Thank you very much for having me, Reggie.
I think there's a lot of people who could take something away from that conversation. All right, we are taking a break on air, but stay with us because the conversation that continues on our live streams, including Facebook Live as we speak. We'll see you right back here after the break. Okay, we have a 2-minute, 15-second break. So for everyone who is joining us on Facebook, I know some of the comments were, actually, some of them included like, way to cut off our expert, our financial expert from earlier. But to be completely transparent of what the thought process is behind how we kind of operate is that, you know, we have these time breaks that we need to hit for the commercial, and we only have about 2 minutes in between. So sometimes when there's a question that has a very long answer, there's no good way to say, hey, let's wrap. Because it's not like our expert Ramit has a floor director or a control room expert in his ear telling him you have 30 seconds left, you have 15 seconds left. So that explains kind of why our abrupt ending to how that happened. So we did send him a message. Ramit Sethi is going to try and respond to all of you on Facebook. Oh, even better, I just found out from, oh, that's great. He is going to email some of these responses. See, again, complete transparency. I have this earpiece in where my producer is telling me things on the fly. So, and you just heard our director, Douglas, say 1 minute in break. So this is all of what's going on. This is everything that's happening minute by minute by minute. And to be honest, multitasking is not very easy, so thank you for bearing with us. We had a second guest on, which was the mayor of Stockton. He has a great documentary on HBO coming out, but I think there was something that happened with his connection that he was not able to join us at the last minute, so that's why we had some of that tiptoeing. Thank you, thank you, thank you for understanding. Let's see. We are going to get the email for you of how you can speak with Ramit Sethi and how he can answer your questions. He's been very generous with his time, so please take advantage of that. I will post that on our Facebook page as soon as the newscast is over, in between now and our 4 o'clock show. So here we go, 10 seconds. Okay. Is it the masquerade? All right, we appreciate you staying with us. Finally now, concern from 2 San Francisco business owners. They apparently planned a 3-day socially distanced masquerade, as they call it, described as a music and dining experience. Now, the owners of the Midway SF, they say they followed the rules, but even so, they were still shut down last week. The city gave them a cease and desist order citing social distancing and food requirements. Peter Glickstern is one of the part owners. He says that social distancing has been implemented and there is a kitchen. Now, patrons, they can order food and drinks while they listen to a DJ on the end of the street. You see him on your screen right now, jamming out, something that has gone on for the last 6 to 7 weeks.
So it's not willy-nilly, it's thought out, it's planned out, and it done, it's executed. We don't make a lot of money on these events. A big part of why we're doing them, I would say 75% of why we're doing these events is to get our people back to work.
We should point out this was a story originally reported at 11 o'clock Sunday night by J.R. Stone. We reached out for San Francisco to get their response. They have not issued it. We'll see you at 4. Okay, to everybody who is watching on Facebook, you have just peeled back the onion and seen what it is like behind the scenes when we are tiptoeing and dancing and trying to figure things out live on TV. Thank you so much for bearing with me. This is, I have to tell you, one of the most challenging shows for me to be a part of, and I appreciate you staying with us, being so engaged, asking those really thoughtful questions for our expert. We will get you, again, that email. I will post it in the comments as we speak. His name, we will link that for you, Alba. And then also Shay will get to that question. We will sign off, and I'm going to get ready for the 4 o'clock newscast.